Hey guys, Michael Merula here. While writing the story of Godfrey's rebellion many years ago, I started thinking about how I could expand my fantasy world. This was at the time when Unknown World, the central continent of Ída, did not exist yet, and the entire story was merely a backdrop for my strategy game concept. I had created three factions: the Umbrians, inspired by Normans and late Roman army; the rebels, now called Silurians, inspired by European Saxons before they migrating to England; two purely mythical nations composed of various humanoid creatures, froblins and morgs, swamp goblins, trolls and pig-like orcs clad in samurai armor. I envisioned new nations as some kind of DLC for this game. One of the first was Oasis Kingdom of Turan, neighboring to the Desert of the Asian Kings, once mighty but now vanished kingdom, feared and inhabited by gnolls, another humanoid race, half human and half hyena. At the time I did not realize that this Asian kingdom had once been the Tarkan Empire, but as it happens with worldbuilding, things evolve, entire continents shift. Now the Desert of the Asian Kings lies within Nari, an Asian civilization in my world inspired by Egypt, Nubia and Zulu warriors. Turan bordered the kingdom of Argos to the south, with which it waged trade war, an integral part of the border story of Godfrey's rebellion. Argos itself is fantasy version of early medieval Greek city-state, reflected in the design of the soldiers, a fusion of Greek hoplites and medieval warriors. While the inspiration initially pointed to the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire, after years of character design I developed my unique version. Over time I moved away from the fantasy approach with monsters and aimed to ground the unknown world in historical realism, creating pseudo-historical world familiar to history enthusiasts. If you pay attention to the names of nations and civilizations, weapons and armor, you will notice that many battles draw direct inspiration from real historical events I read about in ancient books. For example, the Battle of Mohács from the story of Great Flood tells how the last Tarkan emperor Rhesus and his heavy cavalry become bogged down in the mud after endless rains, only to be annihilated by Tengri horse archers, fusion of Huns, Mongols and other nomadic peoples in my world. This was inspired by a story from Herodian's book History of the Roman Empire, described how heavy Sarmatian cavalry sank into the mud after spring thaw and was destroyed by 3 Roman legions. Emperor Rhesus, his name referencing the legendary Thracian king, was further inspired by last Czech king Louis II of Hungary, who drowned in the Battle of Mohács in 1526 after falling into the swamp with his heavy Gothic armor and armored horse. When I write the history of Unknown World, real historical events subconsciously influence my storytelling. Sometimes I think I have come up with something original, only to read about similar real events months later and realize, oh, that's where I subconsciously got it from. For instance, the Battle of Lerna from the story Rise of the Atlanteans is technically inspired by Battle of Trebia from the Second Punic War. These stories emerge as a mix of subconscious events and inspirations, but they are always driven by the structure of world building. Everything is connected, intertwined and influenced one another. When I write about an event, I must and gladly think about what happened before, what will happen after and how it will affect the entire world, its civilization or at least local people. This implies to illustrations, character designs, history writing and lore creation for my fantasy world. I deliberately draw inspiration from ancient and medieval history, particularly in terms of weapons, armor, military strategies and battle tactics. Even names are derived from history. I dislike using purely invented ones. For example, Nari may seem like fictional civilization, but it derives from the ancient Egypt. Narn, the Egyptian name for the Mitanni Empire. Naharin. Argos is named after the ancient Greek city-state, home to my favorite mythical hero, Perseus. Similarly, mythology is major source of inspiration, whatever from old Sword and Sandals movies, strategy games or fantasy literature. One of my biggest influence in the creating a believable fantasy world is Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, the world of Conan the Barbarian. When asked why his fantasy world felt so authentic, Howard replied, "A good fantasy writer should approach it as a historical novelist would. Many assume my Unknown World is just a copy of Howard's Hyborian Age. After all, names like Turan and Argos are familiar to Conan fans. The truth, however, is more complex. This brings me back to the origin of my story. I always had a mild interest in spirituality and believe that everything we do has a purpose, leading us towards goals, whether consciously or by chance. Years ago, I stumbled upon theosophical theories of 6 root races by Helena Blavatsky, early 20th century esoteric writer, which mentioned Lemuria, Atlantis, and Turanians, among others. While her theories have no real basis in history, archaeology, or linguistics, they were popular in her time, and later misused by certain propagandist regimes. Interestingly, Howard was writing his Conan stories in 1930s and 1940s, and the Nemedian Chronicles at the beginning of his book seems directly inspired by these theories. So while I draw inspiration from certain names, I later realized Howard had also based his work on the 6 root races theory. When I brought Godfrey's Rebellion and expanded my world onto a new continent with new nations, it was initially just backdrop for the story, but then Aquila Conquest emerged, the story about the rise of the Tarkan Empire, and from there I delved further back into the prehistory, integrating my old, almost childhood stories such as Belvessus, a heroic tale set in Atlantis, back then when Atlanteans rode dolphins. Thus my timeline of stories formed: the rise of the Atlanteans, the origins of humans and nations in the Unknown World, the Belvessus, the Atlantean slave uprising and founding of Argos, Aquila Conquest, the legendary King Tark Aquila's campaign, his family and how his dynasty ruled nearly the entire known world, the Great Flood and Empire Fall, a cataclysmic disaster, the Tengri invasion and the collapse of the Tarkan Empire, marking the beginning of new smaller kingdoms, a variation of fall of Roman Empire, the Migration period and the Dark Ages, Godfrey's Rebellion, more intimate story about the rebellion of Baron Godfrey against Umbrian rule in the Siluria, with the expanding story of Prince Tolan, a truly Conan-esque heroic tale exploring the Toltec kingdom built by the descendants of the Atlanteans. I could talk endlessly about all the interconnected events in my world, but I try to present everything on my YouTube channel through world-building episodes, illustrations and character designs on my Patreon. Ultimately, my main goal is to complete an art book that unites my artistic and literary work into a single volume, a massive task I have been working on for nearly a decade, and now in 2025, intensively every day for 3 years. Like Hercules battling the Hydra in the swamps of Lerna, this world-building project keeps expanding and I cannot stop. It is my life's work. If anything remains after me, let it be this story, hopefully inspiring fellow world-builders, fans of history, mythology, art and fantasy. Thank you for all your support. I am grateful to have you on this journey. I love you all and see you next time.